My name is Claire, and for 7 years I paid rent on time to live in my parents' apartment, never late, never asking for help. Then one Sunday dinner they told me my younger sister, her husband, and their 2 kids would be moving in with me, rent-free. Within weeks, my fridge was empty, my work calls were interrupted by screaming kids, and a silver bracelet from my late grandmother vanished. But when my mother stood in my living room telling me to give up my bedroom and pay double rent because I had a steady job, I smiled, said I'd think about it, and started planning the one move they would never see coming. Stay with me because you're going to want to know exactly how I walked away and let karma do the rest. I was 31 when I realized I had been living in the same 2-bedroom apartment for 7 years. It sat on the corner of a quiet street in Fremont, Seattle, a place with enough charm to make up for the creaky floorboards and the way the windows let in the winter chill. My parents, Margaret and Frank Dawson, owned the building. They called it an investment property, but I knew they liked the idea of renting it to me because they could keep an eye on me without actually living under the same roof. I had made the apartment my own. I painted the walls soft sage green, replaced the outdated cabinet knobs with brushed brass, and hunted for thrift store rugs that made the living room feel warm in the endless Seattle rain. Friends said it felt like a real home. For me, it was more than that. It was proof that I could live independently, manage my bills, and still have money left to put into my down payment fund. My job at Hunter and Vale Marketing Agency kept me busy but gave me a sense of purpose. I loved the buzz of the creative meetings, the challenge of turning a client's vague idea into a campaign that could actually work. I wasn't at the top of the ladder yet, but I was climbing. My manager Paula often said she could see me leading my own team someday. That mattered to me. It meant I wasn't just coasting through my 30s. Family, on the other hand, was more complicated. We were never the kind to have long phone calls or exchange heartfelt holiday letters. Still, things between us were manageable. We saw each other for birthdays, maybe a barbecue in the summer. The peace held as long as we stayed on the surface of things. I knew part of that distance came from the way my parents treated my younger sister Lily. She was 4 years younger and had been the center of attention for as long as I could remember. She got the first car, the bigger bedroom, the last slice of cake. It wasn't just childhood favoritism. Even as adults, they treated her as if she needed protecting while I was expected to manage on my own. I had learned to live with it. I told myself it didn't matter anymore, that I had my own life and they had theirs. Besides, I didn't want to be the kind of person who kept score. I had my apartment, my career, and a few close friends I could rely on. That was enough for me. On weekday mornings, I had a little routine I loved. I would wake up before my alarm, open the curtains, and watch the street come alive while my coffee brewed. The cafe across the street would flip its sign to open. Cyclists zipped past toward the bridge, and the first hints of sunlight would slip between the clouds. My cat Hazel would curl herself around my ankles until I set down her breakfast. It was small, simple, and entirely mine. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I brewed my coffee, sat at the small kitchen table with my laptop, and checked my emails before my first client call. Most of it was routine client updates, a meeting reschedule, a notification from the utility company. Then I saw one from Paula marked urgent. My stomach did a little flip. She wrote that she wanted me to lead the Whitmore apparel rebranding project. It was one of the biggest accounts we had landed that year. I actually had to read the email twice before it sank in. When I called her to confirm, Paula's voice was bright and certain. "You've earned this, Claire. I want you to own it from start to finish." I thanked her probably more than once, and when we hung up, I sat there for a long moment, grinning like a fool. This was the kind of project that could open doors. The kind that would go on my resume in bold print. I imagined the strategy sessions, the late nights tweaking campaign copy, the thrill of watching our work roll out on billboards and social media. I decided to celebrate that night. After work, I stopped by the market, picked up fresh pasta, a bottle of red wine, and a small bouquet of tulips for the dining table. When I got home, the air smelled faintly of rain and cedar from the building's old beams. I lit a candle, poured myself a glass, and set my phone on silent. As I ate, I thought about how far I had come since my early 20s when I was juggling 2 part-time jobs just to keep a roof over my head. I had built a life that felt stable, one that no one could take away from me. The rent was fair, the location was perfect, and my savings account was growing. For once, the future looked like something I could plan for instead of something that might collapse under me. Later, I curled up on the couch with Hazel purring against my side. I scrolled through design ideas for the Whitmore campaign, already feeling the thrill of possibility. The rain tapped against the window in a soft, steady rhythm. I felt content, even lucky. I didn't know then that everything I had worked to build, the stability, the independence, the hard-won peace, was about to be tested in a way I couldn't have imagined. That night, as the tulips opened slightly in the warm air and the candle burned low, I let myself believe that maybe, just maybe, the hardest parts of my life were behind me. I had no idea the storm that was already gathering on the horizon. Sunday dinners at my parents' house had always been a strange mix of comfort and tension. That evening, the air smelled of roast chicken and rosemary, the kind of meal my mother liked to serve when she wanted everyone at the table. I pulled into their driveway just before 6, the early spring light still clinging to the edges of the day, and I saw Lily's SUV parked across the street. For a moment, I wondered if she had come for dinner too, but the house felt quiet when I walked in. My mom, Margaret, greeted me with her usual quick hug before returning to the kitchen. My dad, Frank, was in his armchair reading the paper. I helped set the table, slipping into the familiar routine. We made small talk over salad, the kind that skims the surface and avoids anything real. Halfway through the main course, my mom set down her fork and looked directly at me. "You know, your sister and Evan have been having a rough time, right?" I paused with my glass of water halfway to my lips. I didn't know. She explained that Evan's contracting business had lost 2 major clients, and they were behind on their rent. Their landlord had given them notice, and they needed to be out by the end of the month. I listened, waiting for the part where she told me they had found a small rental or a short-term sublet. Instead, she smiled faintly and said it would only be for a few months, and I had a spare room. I set my glass down slowly. I asked if they had looked into other options, maybe something more affordable on the outskirts of town, or if they could stay with Evan's parents in Tacoma. My mom waved her hand as if I had misunderstood. "They need somewhere stable, Claire, somewhere, family. You have the space, and it's not like you have anyone living with you." Across the table, my dad avoided my eyes, busying himself with cutting his chicken into tiny, deliberate bites. I felt a slow heat rising in my chest. This wasn't a request. It was being presented as a decision already made. My mind flicked back through years of similar moments. When Lily needed a car for her senior year, my parents gave her mine and told me I could take the bus until I saved up. When I was offered a summer internship out of state, they said it would be better if I stayed home to watch Lily while they traveled. Even the scholarship I had nearly earned in high school was lost because they missed the application deadline, but somehow Lily's paperwork was always filed early. I pushed my plate away slightly and asked how long they were expecting this arrangement to last. My mom gave me that reassuring smile that had smoothed over so many of Lily's mistakes. "Just a few months," she said. "Maybe until the end of summer. And it will be good for you two to spend more time together." I felt my jaw tighten. My sister and I hadn't spent more than an afternoon together in years without it ending in some kind of argument. She had a way of taking up every inch of space, physical and emotional. Still, I tried to keep my voice even. I told my mom that moving in an entire family was a lot to ask without discussing it first. She leaned back, her expression shifting to that familiar mix of disappointment and disapproval. "Claire, sometimes family needs you and you just have to step up. You're the one in a position to help. Lily would do the same for you." I nearly laughed at that, but I bit it back. My dad cleared his throat and mumbled something about the weather turning nice soon, clearly eager to change the subject. I knew better than to expect him to take my side. Then my mom did something that made my stomach drop. She reached for her phone, tapped the screen, and said she had already told Lily they could start bringing things over next Saturday. The date hung in the air like a verdict. I sat there, my fork untouched, trying to process the fact that my life was about to be upended with less than a week's notice. It wasn't just the intrusion of space, it was the message underneath it. My stability, my home could be rearranged whenever it suited them, as if the last 7 years of rent and independence meant nothing. Dinner ended in a blur of polite conversation I barely registered. I helped clear the table, careful not to let my hands shake as I carried dishes to the sink. My mom hummed softly as she rinsed plates, completely at ease. My dad retreated to the living room, already flipping through channels. When I left, the cool night air hit my face, and I realized I had been holding my breath for most of the evening. I drove home with the radio off my mind, replaying the conversation over and over. By the time I parked in front of my building, the tulips on my table from the night before felt like they belonged to another life. Inside, Hazel twined around my legs, purring, unaware of the storm heading our way. I poured a glass of water and stood in the kitchen, staring at the green walls I had painted myself. In less than a week, the quiet I had built here would be gone, replaced by the noise and chaos of Lily's family. I told myself I would think it over, that maybe there was a way to make it work for a short time. But deep down, I already knew this wasn't going to be a temporary inconvenience. It was the beginning of something much bigger, and I had no idea how far it would go. The following Saturday started gray and drizzly, the kind of Seattle morning that usually made me want to stay in bed with a book. Instead, I was up early, clearing a path through the living room and making space in the hall closet. I told myself it would go more smoothly if everything was organized before they arrived. By 9, I heard the rumble of a large SUV pulling up outside, followed by the slam of car doors and the high-pitched voices of children. When I opened the door, Lily was already halfway up the walkway, balancing a designer tote on one arm and gesturing toward the curb, where Evan was unloading a flat-screen television the size of my kitchen table. Behind him, 2 movers were stacking boxes onto a dolly. I forced a polite smile and stepped back to let them in. The first box through the door was labeled Lacey Shows in bold black marker, followed by 1 marked handbags and then a bin full of throw pillows. I glanced at the growing pile, wondering when the essentials were going to appear. Within minutes, the apartment was crowded. Ethan, 9, darted past me holding a video game console. Sophie trailed behind with a stuffed unicorn almost as big as she was. The movers carried in more boxes, each one heavier than the last. I spotted at least 3 labeled toys, another marked winter coats, even though it was April, and a garment rack draped with dresses still in dry cleaning bags. When the television was set against the wall, I cleared my throat. We should probably go over a few ground rules before you get too settled. Lily looked up from unwrapping a ceramic vase, her expression unreadable. I explained that the fridge would be divided so everyone had their own space, that utilities had gone up lately, so I would need $200 a month from them for electricity and water, and that I worked from home 3 days a week, so quiet during my work hours was important. Lily's mouth curved into a small, tight smile. Of course, that makes sense. Evan nodded quickly, avoiding eye contact. I could tell he had no intention of arguing, at least not in front of me. By late afternoon, the apartment no longer looked like mine. The couch was buried under throw blankets in bright clashing colors. The hallway was lined with shoe racks. Ethan's skateboard leaned against the wall next to the door, and Sophie's art supplies had already taken over the small dining table. I tried to remind myself it was temporary, that I could handle a little chaos for a few months. After all, I had survived worse. That evening, after the kids had dinner and Lily was busy arranging candles on the mantel, I retreated to my bedroom with a cup of tea. I was answering a few last work emails when I heard the soft creak of my door. Sophie stood there, clutching a pink plastic tiara. "Hi, sweetie," I said, setting my mug down. She stepped inside without waiting for me to invite her and began looking around. Her eyes landed on the photo frame on my nightstand, a picture of me and my college friends taken on a road trip to the Oregon coast. Before I could say anything, she picked it up. The glass caught the light as she turned it in her hands, and then, as if in slow motion, it slipped through her fingers. The frame hit the hardwood with a sharp crack. I flinched at the sound. Pieces of glass scattered across the floor, the photo itself bent and torn at the corner. Sophie's eyes widened, but before I could even speak, Lily appeared in the doorway. "What happened?" she asked, glancing from Sophie to me. I told her the frame had fallen. Lily scooped Sophie up and kissed her cheek. "Oh, it's just a frame. We'll get you another one." "It's not just a frame," I said, quietly kneeling to pick up the shards. "That picture means something to me." Lily's smile tightened. "Claire, she's 5. It's not the end of the world." I bit down on the urge to point out that 5-year-olds could still be taught to respect other people's things. Instead, I focused on gathering the glass, my hands steady even though my chest felt tight. Lily carried Sophie out of the room, her voice drifting back, talking about finding a snack. When I was done cleaning up, I sat on the edge of my bed and stared at the empty space where the photo had been. It wasn't about the frame. It was about how easily something personal could be dismissed, how quickly my boundaries could be brushed aside in my own home. Outside my door, the television blared and the kids laughed over some game, their voices echoing through the apartment. I closed my eyes for a moment, telling myself I could get through the evening without another confrontation. But deep down, I already felt the balance tipping, and I knew this was only the first crack in the walls I had built around my peace. Within 2 weeks, it was obvious that the rules we had agreed on were little more than background noise to Lily and Evan. The fridge shelves I had cleared for my own groceries were now crammed with half-empty soda bottles, takeout containers, and 3 different tubs of whipped cream. The yogurt and fresh fruit I bought would disappear within a day, and no one ever mentioned replacing them. The quiet hours I had asked for during my work-from-home days vanished almost immediately. The television in the living room seemed to be on from breakfast until well after midnight. Ethan and Sophie turned the hallway into a racetrack, their footsteps pounding against the wood floors as they chased each other with plastic swords. Even with my bedroom door closed, I could hear every shriek and crash. My utility bill for the first month arrived, and my stomach sank. The total was nearly double what it had been before they moved in. Lights were left on in every room, the dryer ran for single loads, and the dishwasher churned almost daily, even when it was half empty. One Wednesday morning, I had a virtual presentation for a major client. I had been rehearsing for days, making sure every slide was tight and polished. At exactly 10, I joined the video call. Elaine Grayson, my boss and the agency founder, was already there, her expression sharp but encouraging. I began walking the clients through the campaign strategy, my voice steady, despite the faint thump of something in the background. Halfway through explaining the ad placement schedule, Ethan's voice exploded from the living room. Mom, where's my blue hoodie?" His shouting was so loud it made my microphone spike. I saw Elaine's brow crease, her eyes flicking to the noise in my background. I scrambled to mute myself, my pulse hammering in my ears. I could still hear Ethan yelling, followed by Lily's muffled response, and the sound of a door slamming. I unmuted and forced a calm smile into my voice, pretending nothing had happened, but I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. After the call ended, Elaine stayed on for a moment. "I just want to mention something, Claire. I used to mentor your sister years ago before she left the agency. She had potential, but she never had the discipline to follow through." Her eyes softened slightly. "I know you're different, but be mindful of what you allow to interfere with your work." Her words landed heavier than I expected. I thanked her, assured her it wouldn't happen again, and logged off. But the comment stuck with me for the rest of the day, lodged like a small stone in my chest. It wasn't just about the noise or the disruption. It was about the shadow of Lily's reputation stretching into my own career. That afternoon, I tried again to reset boundaries. I found Lily in the kitchen scrolling through her phone while a pot of pasta boiled over on the stove. I told her about the interruption during my meeting and asked if she could keep the kids occupied when I was working. She nodded, said she understood, and then within minutes Ethan was back in the hallway kicking a soccer ball against the wall. By the weekend, I stopped keeping track of how many times I restated the same requests. The fridge was still overstuffed with their groceries, leaving my produce to wilt in the crisper. I would find my charger missing from my desk, my clean laundry pushed aside in the dryer so they could run a single hoodie. One night I returned from a late client dinner to find the living room rearranged. My armchair had been shoved into the corner to make room for a second gaming console, and my bookshelf had been emptied of half its contents so Sophie could line up her dolls in a neat row. I stood there for a moment, taking in the new chaos, my fingers curling tightly around my bag strap. Evan looked up from the couch and asked if I wanted to join them for a movie. I told him I was tired and headed straight to my room. Hazel followed, slipping in before I closed the door. I leaned against it for a moment, listening to the laughter and the rumble of the television through the thin walls. In the quiet of my room, I thought about Elaine's voice, about the way she had compared me to my sister without meaning harm. I knew I had to prove that I could keep my career intact, despite the storms swirling around me. But with every day that passed, the line between my life and theirs blurred a little more, and I could feel my grip on my own space slipping. I lay down, staring at the ceiling, wondering how much longer I could pretend that this was a temporary situation. By the third week of their stay, the tension had settled into my bones like a weight I carried everywhere. The constant noise, the clutter, the feeling that nothing in my home belonged entirely to me anymore, had begun to seep into every corner of my day. And on top of it all, Lily still hadn't said a word about the $200 we had agreed she and Evan would contribute toward the utilities. I tried to be patient. Maybe she had forgotten. Maybe she was waiting for payday. I told myself I'd bring it up casually and she would just hand it over. But each time I thought about starting the conversation, I pictured her shrugging it off or changing the subject, and my stomach would tighten. One Thursday evening, after I wrapped up a long day of meetings, I found her in the kitchen stirring a pot of pasta. The kids were in their room arguing over a video game. I leaned against the counter and said I'd just gotten the electric bill. It was almost double what it had been before they moved in. I reminded her we had agreed on the $200 to help cover the difference. She smiled like I'd just mentioned the weather. "Oh, right. Yeah, I'll get it to you. Things are a little tight right now, so maybe next week or the one after." Her voice was light, almost cheerful, as if she'd just asked me to pass the salt. My chest tightened. It wasn't just the money. It was the way she made it sound like I was asking for something unreasonable when all I'd done was hold her to the agreement we made before they moved in. The next morning my phone rang as I was clearing emails. Mom's name flashed on the screen. I answered, expecting a quick hello, but her tone was warm in that careful way she used when she was about to ask me to bend. She said Lily was having a hard time and that maybe I could ease up about the utilities for now. She reminded me that I had a good job, a steady income, and that I was lucky to have my own place when so many people my age still lived with roommates. I tried to explain that it wasn't about luck, it was about fairness. I was already paying rent to them every month, and now I was covering higher bills because of 4 extra people in the apartment. Mom sighed like I'd missed the point entirely. She said I'd always been the responsible one, the one they could count on. The words felt less like a compliment and more like a burden being slid back onto my shoulders. After we hung up, I sat there for a long minute staring at my phone. The conversation had left a sour taste in my mouth. I knew that in her mind this was just another example of me stepping up, but to me it was another example of being taken for granted. Later that afternoon, I came home from the grocery store to find the apartment unusually quiet. The living room was empty, the television off. My bedroom door was open a few inches. I pushed it gently and froze. Sophie was sitting cross-legged on the floor with my jewelry box open beside her, the contents spread out in a glittering half-circle. She was trying on one of my necklaces, holding it up to her neck in the mirror. I crouched down, keeping my voice soft. "Those are delicate, sweetheart. Let me help you put them back." She held up a silver bracelet, one of the pair my grandmother had given me before she passed, and asked if it was real. I took it gently from her and began placing the pieces back into the box, counting them as I went. That was when I realized the matching bangle was missing. "Did you see another bracelet like this one?" I asked. She frowned, said maybe it rolled under the bed. I searched under the bed, under the dresser, even in the hallway, but it was nowhere. When I told Lily, she barely looked up from her phone. She gave a short laugh and said I should keep valuable things out of reach if I didn't want the kids getting into them. Her tone was flat, almost mocking, as if I were overreacting. "It's not about value," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "That bracelet was my grandmother's." She shrugged, eyes already back on her screen. "Well, kids are curious. You can't expect them to understand sentimental stuff." Her words stung in a way I hadn't expected. It wasn't just the loss of the bracelet. It was the dismissal, the implication that I had invited this by not guarding my things more closely. That night, I moved the jewelry box to the top shelf of my closet, hidden behind a stack of winter sweaters. I sat on the edge of my bed, Hazel curled up beside me, and listened to the muffled laughter from the other room. My space, my possessions, even my time felt like they were no longer mine. I thought about calling Mom to tell her about the bracelet to see if maybe she'd understand this time. But I could already hear her voice in my head urging me not to make a big deal out of it, reminding me Lily was under stress. So I stayed quiet, running my fingers over the empty spot in the jewelry box that only I would notice. Outside my window, the rain had started again, tapping against the glass. It sounded like a slow, steady clock ticking down the time I had left before something inside me would snap. The morning after the rain, I woke to the sound of cupboards slamming and drawers opening in the kitchen. It was barely 8 and the smell of burnt toast was already drifting down the hallway. I wrapped myself in a sweater and stepped out to find Lily making pancakes while Evan sat at the table scrolling through his phone. Sophie was coloring on the floor and Ethan was arguing about the last waffle. The place felt crowded in a way that went beyond physical space. I poured myself coffee and was about to retreat to my room when the doorbell rang. Before I could move, Lily called out that it was Mom and Dad. She seemed surprised too. My parents almost never showed up without calling. Mom stepped inside first, carrying a tote bag and looking around with a quick, critical eye. Her gaze swept over the toy bins overflowing in the corner, the shoes scattered by the door, and the laundry basket sitting in the hallway. She smiled in that tight way she had when she wanted to be polite but was already making a judgment. "Looks like you've got your hands full here," she said, and then turned to me. "Claire, I've been thinking. With the kids needing more space, maybe it would make sense for you to take the smaller bedroom. That way Lily and Evan could move into the larger one." I blinked at her, sure I had misheard. "You mean my bedroom? The one I've been in for 7 years?" She nodded briskly as if the decision had already been made. "It would be more comfortable for them, and besides, you don't need all that extra space." Before I could answer, she pulled a manila envelope from her tote and set it on the dining table. "Inside is the updated lease. Just a few changes," she said, brushing invisible crumbs from the table. I pulled the top page halfway out of the envelope and my eyes caught on the number printed in bold near the top. $2,600. I felt my heart skip. "That's double my rent," I said, looking up at her. "The market's gone up," she replied smoothly, "and with more people living here, now it's fair to adjust. Plus it will cover some of the wear and tear." I asked her why this had to be done now when my current lease didn't expire until December. She avoided my eyes and said it would be cleaner if everyone was on the same agreement. "We can get this signed today and have it done." I glanced at Lily. She was standing by the counter, eyes fixed on the mug in her hands. Evan had shifted his weight against the doorway but didn't look at me. Dad was flipping through a magazine from the stack by the bookshelf, pretending to read. I kept my tone even. "Mom, I've been paying you $1,300 on time every month for years. I've taken care of this place. Why would my rent double when I'm moving into a smaller room?" "Because you're the one with a steady job," she said without hesitation, as if that explained everything. "You can handle it." The words landed like stones in my stomach. I could see how she framed it as practicality, but it felt like she was simply shifting responsibility onto me because I was the easier option. I set the lease back on the table and folded my hands. "I appreciate you thinking this through," I said quietly, "but I'm not signing anything today. I'll need time to review it." She pursed her lips but didn't press. Maybe she thought my resistance was just a formality. The rest of the visit played out in a strained silence. Mom made small talk about the weather, Dad kept flipping pages, and Lily asked the kids to pick up their toys. No one brought up the lease again, but the envelope sat there between us like a stone in the middle of the table. When they finally left, I picked it up and carried it to my room. I didn't even bother opening it all the way. Hazel jumped onto the bed beside me, curling into a tight ball against my leg. I stroked her fur, my mind already turning over the possibilities. For weeks I had felt cornered, like the walls of my own life were being pushed inward. But sitting there with that envelope, I felt something shift. I knew exactly what I was going to do. It would take some planning, some patience, but when the time came, there would be no argument, no begging me to change my mind. I slipped the envelope into the back of my desk drawer and closed it. Outside, the sky had cleared to a pale blue, but the air still held the sharp scent of rain. For the first time in months, I felt like I had a plan that belonged only to me. I started small. The next morning on my way to work, I took the long route and stopped by a coffee shop a few blocks from my office. Robert Jenkins, one of our longtime clients at Grayson and Company, was sitting by the window with a newspaper. We had talked before about his property investments, mostly in passing, and I knew he owned several small apartment buildings outside the city. I greeted him and asked if he happened to know of any one-bedroom rentals that were quiet and reasonably priced. He set down his mug and said he might have just the place in Tacoma. It was in a brick building from the 40s, recently renovated with hardwood floors and big windows. The rent was fair, and he said the current tenant would be out in 2 weeks. My pulse quickened as he described it. I told him I wanted to see it as soon as possible. That Saturday, I drove down to Tacoma under the pretense of meeting a friend for lunch. The neighborhood was calm, lined with maple trees that were just starting to bud. When Robert unlocked the door, the scent of fresh paint and lemon cleaner filled the air. The apartment was small but full of light, with a kitchen that overlooked a courtyard. I knew instantly it could be mine. I told him I would take it and handed over a deposit on the spot. Back at home, I began to prepare. I opened a new bank account at a branch near my office, making sure all statements would be sent digitally. I gathered my birth certificate, passport, and other important papers and brought them to work, locking them in my desk drawer. I started packing in careful increments, choosing items that could pass as donations. Each week, I filled 1 or 2 boxes and labeled them for charity. I dropped them at the thrift store on my lunch breaks, no one in the apartment any wiser. One evening, I met my friend Anna for coffee. She had gone through a brutal eviction battle with a landlord the year before and now worked with a legal aid group. I told her about the new lease my mom had tried to push on me and asked if she could look at my current agreement. She scanned the pages, then shook her head. "Claire, this lease is valid until December. They cannot raise your rent or change the terms unless you agree in writing. You don't have to sign anything new." Her words hit like a steady anchor, dropping into place. The pressure I had been feeling began to shift into something else. Certainty. I thanked her, and she promised to connect me with a lawyer friend who could confirm it. A few days later, over the phone, that lawyer walked me through the details. "Unless you break the lease, you are protected until it expires," he said. "If they try to force you, it's illegal." I hung up with a sense of quiet power I hadn't felt in months. My family had assumed they could nudge me into a corner, but the law was on my side. All I had to do was leave on my own terms. In the evenings after everyone had gone to bed, I would pack for an hour at a time. I wrapped my grandmother's china in towels and tucked it into a suitcase. I slid books into reusable grocery bags and stacked them in my closet. Every so often, Lily would ask why I was giving away so much, and I would tell her I was decluttering. She seemed satisfied enough with that answer. Hazel followed me from room to room as if she sensed something was changing. I made a mental checklist: utilities, forwarding, address, key handover. I decided that when the day came, I would move quickly and quietly, leaving nothing for them to argue over. One rainy Wednesday, I came home early to find Mom in the kitchen with Lily. They stopped talking when I walked in. The manila envelope with the lease was still on the counter, as if waiting for me. Mom gave me a smile that didn't reach her eyes and asked if I had a chance to think about it. I said I was still considering, keeping my tone even. She reminded me that time was running short, that Lily and Evan needed stability. I nodded but didn't commit. The less I said, the easier it was to keep my plan hidden. That night, in the quiet of my room, I slid another box under the bed. My move-out date was set in my head, circled in my mind like a red mark on a calendar no one else could see. Every day between now and then was just a step closer to the door. The morning I had chosen came with a thin mist over the parking lot and the sound of distant gulls. I opened my eyes before the alarm went off, my mind already clear and steady. Hazel stretched along the foot of the bed, sensing my energy and watching me closely. I dressed in jeans and a sweatshirt, clothes I could move in, and tied my hair back. My overnight bag sat ready by the door, packed with toiletries and a change of clothes in case the day took longer than I planned. The rest would go into boxes and bins, each one part of the life I was taking with me. At 8 on the dot, Tara's old hatchback rolled into the lot, the muffler giving a low rattle. She emerged with a travel mug in one hand and a bundle of flattened boxes in the other. We didn't hug or talk about the weather. She knew as well as I did that we had a narrow window. Inside, the apartment felt unnervingly still. Lily and Evan had taken the kids to Mom's for the weekend, and I knew they wouldn't be back until Sunday night. That silence was my advantage. I handed Tara a key so she could come and go without knocking, then we got to work. We started in my bedroom, the most personal space. Clothes went into suitcases, books into sturdy grocery bags, framed photos into padded boxes. I moved quickly, resisting the urge to flip through old journals or linger over mementos. The goal was speed and precision, not nostalgia. Tara ferried each finished box down the hall on a small folding dolly and loaded them into her car. I heard the dull thud of cardboard sliding into the trunk, the quiet slam of the hatch closing. She was back upstairs within minutes, ready for another load. By 9:30, the closet was empty except for a couple of bent wire hangers. My bed frame was disassembled, the mattress leaning against the wall. Hazel's carrier sat near the door, a fleece blanket inside. I spoke to her softly as I passed, promising she would like the new place. In the kitchen, I wrapped my grandmother's china in dish towels and slid the bundles into a plastic bin. The rest of the dishes I left neatly stacked in the cupboards. A few of them had been purchased jointly with Lily and Evan when they first moved in, and I had no interest in sorting through ownership. The living room looked oddly larger without my bookcase, side table, or the small armchair where I'd spent countless evenings. The rug, a gift from an old coworker, was rolled and bound with twine, leaning against the wall. The coffee table still held the manila envelope with the revised lease exactly where my mom had left it weeks ago. I walked over and set my apartment keys beside it. From my bag, I pulled out a note I had written the night before. I have found a new place. Wishing you the best. I weighed it down with the smooth river stone that had lived on my desk for years. That stone had been a paperweight, a worry stone, a tiny anchor. Now it would be the period at the end of my sentence here. Tara came back in, brushing hair from her face. Just a few more, she said. We're making good time. I nodded, my eyes sweeping over the space one more time. By 10:30, the bedroom was bare, the bathroom shelves wiped clean, the hallway closet emptied. Only the faint outlines on the walls and the ghost impressions in the carpet marked where my life had been. I took Hazel and her carrier down to the van I had rented under my name 2 days earlier. It was parked a block away, so no one would notice. The carrier sat on the passenger seat, and I cracked the window so she could have fresh air. When I came back upstairs for the last load, I stood in the middle of the living room. The air smelled faintly of lavender, cleaner from the night before. It should have felt like a home, but it was just a set of rooms now stripped of the warmth I had once poured into it. Tara handed me the final box, a mix of odds and ends that hadn't fit anywhere else, a throw blanket, a couple of candles, a framed print of the Seattle skyline. I balanced it against my hip, took one last look around, and walked to the door. In the hallway, the light from the narrow windows fell across the carpet in pale gold stripes. I pulled the door shut behind me, the latch clicking with a small finality. We made the last trip to the van, loading everything carefully so nothing would shift. Tara followed me in her car, her trunk and backseat full. As I pulled out of the lot, I caught my reflection in the rearview mirror. My shoulders were lower than they had been in months, my jaw unclenched. The street ahead was clear, lined with trees just beginning to bud. I didn't look back at the building. It wasn't mine anymore, and I wasn't its. The first night in my new apartment was quiet in a way that felt almost unnatural. The hum of the refrigerator, the faint traffic outside, the soft purring from Hazel as she curled against my side were the only sounds. My phone sat on the kitchen counter, turned face down, the ringer switched off. By the time morning light came through the blinds, the screen was lit up with missed calls. 10 from Mom, 6 from Dad, 9 from Lily. I brewed coffee before I even touched it. The rich smell filled the kitchen, and I let the steam rise into my face before picking up the phone. I scrolled through the numbers in red, stacking one after another, and my stomach gave a slow twist. Most had been within an hour of each other last night. There were also text notifications, but I didn't open them yet. Instead, I sat at the small table, sipped my coffee, and watched Hazel bat at the strings of the blinds. It was close to 9 when I finally called Mom back. She picked up on the first ring. Her voice was sharp the way it got when she was holding back anger. "Where are you? Do you know what you've done?" I told her I had moved into a new place, that it was something I needed to do for myself. "You need to give me your address," she said. "This isn't acceptable, disappearing like that." I told her no, gently but firmly. She demanded again, her voice rising. I could hear the edge of disbelief, like she was waiting for me to break and explain myself away. Dad's voice cut in muffled in the background, and then he was on the line. "Your mother's just... She's having trouble with this, Claire. Maybe you could meet with us, talk it through." I said I wasn't interested in talking it through. I had made my decision, and it wasn't up for negotiation. There was a pause, the sound of Mom muttering under her breath. Dad didn't push. "Well, I guess we'll give you some space," he said quietly, and then hung up. I stared at the phone for a moment before setting it down. It buzzed almost instantly with a new text. This one was from Lily. "So you just leave," she wrote. "You leave your niece and nephew without saying goodbye." I could feel the familiar pull of guilt tightening in my chest, but I didn't answer right away. 2 minutes later, another message came. "If you had just been willing to work with us, none of this would have blown up. You always make everything harder than it needs to be." My fingers hovered over the screen. I thought about the broken bracelet, the empty shelves in my kitchen, the way my boundaries had been treated like suggestions. Finally, I typed a reply. "The responsibilities of parents belong to the parents." I hit send and turned the phone face down again. For the rest of the morning, the calls slowed but didn't stop entirely. I let them go to voicemail. I unpacked my dishes, lined them neatly in the cabinet, set my books on the shelves. Hazel explored each corner, sniffing the baseboards and peeking into the bedroom closet. Around noon, Tara dropped by with a housewarming plant, a leafy pothos in a white ceramic pot. She didn't ask about the calls, just set the plant on the counter and helped me hang curtains in the living room. We opened the windows and let the fresh air in. While we worked, my phone buzzed again. I glanced at the preview on the lock screen. Mom had sent a short message. "I can't believe you'd do this to your own family." I slid it aside without reading the rest. By evening, the missed calls were fewer, replaced by longer text messages from Lily that alternated between anger and self-pity. I read the first line of one before deleting it. There was nothing in them I hadn't heard before, nothing that would change the fact that I was here in my own space and they were not. I heated a simple dinner, ate at the table with the plant beside me and Hazel watching from the windowsill. Outside, the sun dipped low, turning the buildings across the street a warm gold. It struck me then that I hadn't heard a single raised voice all day. No television blaring, no doors slamming, no footsteps pounding down the hallway, just the quiet I had been craving for months. When my phone lit up again, I didn't reach for it. I took my plate to the sink, washed it, and set it to dry. The sky deepened into twilight and I pulled the curtains closed. The world outside could wait. 2 weeks had passed before I heard anything more than the occasional missed call or text that I ignored. That morning, my phone buzzed on the counter while I was pouring coffee. I glanced at the screen and saw Dad's name. For a moment, I thought about letting it ring, but something in me decided to pick up. His voice was softer than usual, carrying that weary edge. I remembered from the few times he'd been stuck in the middle of my mother and me. He asked how I was settling in. I told him I liked the new place, that Hazel was enjoying the sunlight in the mornings, and that work was busy in a good way. He hesitated, and I knew something else was coming. Apparently, things at the old apartment had taken a turn. The landlord had stopped pretending this was some long-term free arrangement and told Lily and Mark they needed to start paying rent or vacate. Without my checks covering the place, they were suddenly faced with the same reality the rest of us lived in. Mark had picked up extra shifts at a warehouse in Kent and was even working nights at a big box store to make ends meet. Lily had been applying for cashier and stock jobs at a local grocery chain, but so far had only landed a part-time position. Dad went on to say they'd enrolled Sophie in daycare because neither of them was home during the day anymore. Ethan had been telling his teachers that his parents argued most nights when they thought the kids were asleep. Dad sighed like he was carrying the weight of all of it, and I could tell he wanted me to offer a solution. I didn't. I asked gently if Lily had considered cutting back on her spending. There was a pause before he admitted she'd already sold a few handbags and pairs of designer shoes to cover bills. I remembered those boxes taking up half my hallway closet when they moved in, all neatly arranged while my own things were squeezed into corners. Now they were pawning them off one by one. That afternoon, my phone lit up again, this time with a video call from Ethan. His smile appeared before the camera had even focused. His hair stuck out in every direction, and I could hear Sophie chattering in the background. He told me he missed me and Hazel and turned the camera to show Sophie waving, her face still round with baby softness. She went back to coloring while Ethan leaned closer to the screen. He said Mom and Dad were busy all the time now, that Sophie stayed at daycare until it was dark some days, and that he wished they could come over like before. I told him my new place was small, but maybe we could meet for ice cream one weekend. His whole face lit up, and he made me promise. I did. After we hung up, I sat there holding my phone, thinking about the kids. I loved them, but love didn't mean losing myself again. Every time I had stepped in before, it had ended the same way, Lily leaning on me until I was carrying everything while she and Mark avoided the hard work of holding their own lives together. That evening, I lit a candle on the kitchen table and opened the windows. The scent of rain from earlier in the day drifted in, mixing with the faint warmth of the setting sun. I poured a glass of wine and sat back, letting the quiet fill the space. A week earlier, I might have felt guilt twisting in my chest after that call. Now I realized guilt had a different shape. It no longer pulled me toward fixing things. It just reminded me that I could feel compassion without stepping back into a role that had nearly drained me dry. On Sunday, Tara came by and we took Hazel to a park by the water. We found a bench under a wide maple tree, and while Hazel dozed in the shade, Tara asked if I'd heard any more from Lily. I told her about Dad's call and Ethan's video chat. She leaned back, watching the ripples in the water, and said, "Maybe this was the wake-up they needed." I shrugged. Maybe. But I knew for me there was no undoing the boundaries I'd set. That night, as I folded laundry in the living room, I looked around my new apartment. It was smaller than the old one, but it felt entirely mine. Every piece of furniture was where I wanted it. The quiet wasn't fragile here. There was no constant sense that at any second someone might barge in with noise, demands, or criticism. My phone buzzed again on the counter. This time, it was a text from Dad. It read, "Just wanted to say I'm proud of you for taking care of yourself." I stared at it for a moment, then smiled and typed back a simple thank you. It was the first time in years anyone in my family had acknowledged my choices without an attached lecture or guilt trip. When I went to bed, Hazel curled at my feet. The room was cool from the evening air, and I felt a steady calm settle in my chest. Outside, the chaos of my sister's life would keep spinning, but it wasn't mine to fix anymore. I pulled the blanket higher, turned off the lamp, and let the quiet carry me into sleep. By the time spring came back around, the world looked different to me. My morning started in the sunlit kitchen of my own townhouse in Tacoma, a place I had chosen and paid for with my own name on the deed. It had cost me $415,000, a number that once would have made my stomach clench, but now it felt like proof of everything I had worked for. The promotion at Grayson and Company had brought a raise big enough to make the mortgage comfortable, and my savings had grown in ways I hadn't imagined a year ago. The townhouse had 2 floors, a small fenced yard, and a little deck where Hazel liked to sit in the afternoon sun. I kept the place just the way I liked it. Every picture on the wall, every mug in the cabinet was mine. No one moved things without asking. No one turned the television up so loud that the floor vibrated. One Tuesday in early May, a small brown package arrived at my door. The handwriting on the label made my chest tighten for a moment. It was my mother's paramai. Inside, wrapped in tissue paper, was the silver bracelet I had thought was gone forever. It had a slight bend in one of the links, as if it had been stepped on, but it was still the same bracelet my grandmother had left me. Tucked beside it was a note in my mother's careful cursive. "This belongs to you." I sat at the kitchen table holding it, feeling something shift, not quite forgiveness, but a loosening in the knot I had carried. I didn't call her. I just put the bracelet on and let it stay there. Summer came, and with it an invitation to Ethan's 10th birthday party. It was being held at a community center in Federal Way, a neutral place that felt safe enough for a first real family gathering. I decided to go partly because I missed the kids and partly because I wanted to see if anything had truly changed. When I arrived, Ethan spotted me from across the room and ran over, nearly knocking the paper crown off his head. Sophie followed, her arms wrapping around my waist in a quick, shy hug before darting back to the cake table. Mark nodded at me from near the snack table, looking more tired than I remembered but less defensive. My parents were there too. Dad gave me a warm smile. Mom's was smaller, but it was there. We exchanged polite words about the party, the cake, the weather. No one brought up the past. Lacey kept her distance for most of the afternoon. She was wearing jeans and a t-shirt, her hair pulled back, no glittering accessories in sight. She moved between helping Sophie with her plate and chatting with a couple of other moms. After the cake was cut and the kids ran off to the playground, she walked over to where I was standing near the window. For a moment, she looked like she might change her mind and turn away, but she stayed. She glanced down at my wrist at the bracelet, then back up at me. Her voice was quieter than I expected when she said, "You were right." Just those 3 words. I didn't rush to fill the silence. I let them sit between us, heavier than they sounded. I told her I hoped things were getting better for her and the kids. She nodded and said they were managing. She mentioned she was working full-time now at the grocery store and that Mark's hours were steadier. We stood there for another minute, not friends, not quite enemies, just 2 women who had learned the cost of certain choices. Then Sophie came running up, asking her mom for help with her shoes, and Lacey gave me one last look before walking away. On the drive home, I kept thinking about that moment. It wasn't an apology, not exactly. But it was something I never thought I would hear from her. Back at my townhouse, I hung my jacket on the hook by the door and stepped out onto the deck. The late summer air was warm, the skies streaked with pink. Hazel trotted out after me, curling up on the outdoor rug. I rested my arm on the railing, the bracelet catching the fading light. A year ago, I had been standing in a crowded apartment wondering how much of myself I could give away before there was nothing left. Now I was here in a place I built for myself, holding on to my peace like it was the most valuable thing I owned. Inside, my phone buzzed with a new message, but I didn't rush to check it. I stayed on the deck until the sun dipped below the trees, breathing in the quiet that was finally completely mine. I set the phone on the kitchen counter and let the evening cool settle around me. The next morning, I woke with a small list written in my head. Housewarming next Saturday. Keep it simple. Keep it mine. I sent a message to the family chat with clear details. Open house from 2 to 5 in the afternoon. Parking on the street only. No extra boxes or bags. I added a line that felt both practical and like a promise to myself. Please plan to head out by 5 so I can clean up and rest. I hit send and felt the small click of a boundary locking into place. During the week, I picked up groceries in 2 careful trips. A platter of roast chicken, a big green salad, corn on the cob to grill, lemonade, and iced tea in glass dispensers that could sit on the counter and look cheerful. I baked a sheet pan of brownies on Friday night so the house would smell like chocolate when everyone walked in. Saturday morning, I swept the little deck and set out folding chairs. Hazel stalked the edges of the yard like a tiny guard, then decided the sun was warm enough to stretch across the rug by the patio door. At 1:50, my doorbell rang. Dad stood there in a polo shirt and jeans with a bottle of seltzer in one hand and a soft smile on his face. He stepped inside and looked around slowly, taking in the photos on the wall and the light pooling on the hardwood floor. "This suits you," he said, and the relief in his eyes almost undid me. He set the bottle on the counter and asked what he could do. I handed him a stack of paper plates and pointed to the deck. He started arranging them with the careful focus of a man who wanted everything to be easy for once. Mom arrived a few minutes later with a potted fern and a bakery box. She paused at the threshold as if unsure of the rules. I took the plant, thanked her, and placed it on the kitchen island. She wandered through the living room with her hands folded the way she used to move through furniture stores, eyes measuring and weighing. "Nice place," she said at last. I nodded. "It is." Lily and Evan pulled up just after 2. Ethan bounded up the steps, the kind of energy that arrives in a burst and fills a space, and threw his arms around my waist before he remembered himself and stepped back. Sophie followed with a shy smile and a paper bag that crinkled in her hands. Lily carried a simple white gift bag that clinked softly. For a moment we all stood in the entryway like a small weather system, deciding which way to move. I reached for the gift and thanked them, then pointed to a spot on the console table where cards and small packages could sit. No one tried to bring anything else through the door. People found their places easily after that. Dad flipped burgers on the small grill, humming under his breath. Mom arranged the salad as if she owned the dish, then stepped back when I slid the dressing to the other side. Ethan and Sophie took turns feeding Hazel treats and laughing when she pretended not to care. Evan offered to carry a tray outside, and I let him, grateful for the small practical things no one argued over. We ate in the soft shade of the deck. The neighbors' wind chimes clicked gently in the light breeze. Conversations stayed on the surface where they were safest. Work, school, the weather, the new bakery on Pacific Avenue that everyone had an opinion about. Every now and then I felt a knot of old tension try to climb my shoulders, and each time I breathed and let it slide back down. When the plates were mostly empty and the lemonade had settled to half full, Dad stood with his glass in hand. He looked at me, then at everyone else, and cleared his throat. His voice was steady. "To Claire. To your new home and to the life you have built. I am proud of you." He lifted the glass and everyone followed. Even Mom's eyes softened. I felt the words land somewhere I had been guarding for a long time. I let them in. After the toast, Lily joined me in the kitchen while I cut the brownies. For a minute she watched the knife move through the warm squares, then she reached to adjust a stack of napkins and stopped herself. Her voice was careful when she spoke. "The place looks good. You look good." There was nothing complicated in it. I told her I was glad she came. She nodded and said they would need to leave on time because Ethan had a project due Monday. I heard the subtext and I appreciated it. We were learning the language of lines drawn and kept. Mom wandered over with the bakery box and asked if I wanted to put the cookies out now or save them for later. I said now would be perfect. She hesitated, then set them down beside the brownies and stepped back, palms open. It was a small motion, and I saw it for what it was. A tiny surrender to the fact that this was my kitchen, my timeline, my call. On the deck, Ethan tugged at my sleeve and asked if he could see my office. I led him upstairs to the small room with the desk by the window. The campaign boards leaned against the wall, and a corkboard held postcards and scribbles and a photo of Hazel looking insolent. He looked around with the keen interest of a kid who has learned to read a room with adult eyes. He said it looked peaceful. I told him that was the plan. He nodded as if storing the idea peaceful, and I hoped he would remember it when he needed it. Back downstairs, the day folded itself into the shape I had imagined. People ate and talked. The kids chased Hazel down the hall and then apologized when she glared at them. Evan asked about my mortgage rate with the casual envy that does not sting when it is honest. Mom moved carefully through my cupboards, taking only a serving spoon and then putting it exactly back. Dad kept checking the time and then catching my eye and smiling as if to say, "I have got this." At 4:45, I stood and thanked everyone for coming. I said I was so happy to have them here and that I had an early start at the office on Monday to prep a pitch. It was true, and it was also the boundary dressed in a polite coat. People took the cue. Cups went into the bin, plate stacked. Lily gathered Sophie's sweater and Ethan's cap without leaving a single thing behind. Mom slipped the fern instruction card into her purse and did not try to tuck anything else around it. At 5 on the dot, the last hug was given and the last car door closed. The house exhaled. I stood in the kitchen with my hands on the island and listened to the quiet settle. Hazel trotted out from behind the couch like a hostess relieved her guests had enjoyed themselves and left on time. The sun slid lower and turned the edges of the room honey gold. I rinsed the glasses and set them to dry, wiped the counter, folded the deck chairs, and felt a sense of rightness deepen with every small task. I thought about all the ways I had once tried to earn peace. I had over-explained, overworked, overgave. In the end, the thing that changed everything was simple. I stopped fighting to be understood and started living in a way that did not need permission. I made a life that mirrored what I valued: space, calm, reciprocity, respect. People sometimes ask what revenge feels like when you do not take a swing. It feels like waking up and realizing you are no longer auditioning for a part in a story that never fit. It feels like setting a table in your own home and inviting people to sit, then walking them to the door with a thank you and a smile when it is time to go. It feels like knowing that your worth was never supposed to be measured by how much you could carry for everyone else. I carried the last bag of recycling to the bin and stood for a moment under the soft evening sky. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked once, then quieted. I went back inside and locked the door. Hazel leapt onto the couch and made a nest in the throw blanket. I sat beside her and rested my wrist on the cushion, the silver bracelet cool against my skin. If any of this sounds like a crossroads you have stood at, I hope you hear this. You do not have to light yourself on fire to keep everyone else warm. You can draw a line and still be kind. You can choose quiet and call it strength. If you have ever had to decide between your own peace and the expectations that press in, tell me how you found your way. Share your story in the comments so the rest of us can learn from it. If this resonated with you, tap like so it reaches someone who needs it, and subscribe to stay for more stories about boundaries, resilience, and the kind of wins that do not require applause. Tonight I am closing my door on time, and it feels like the happiest ending I could have written.